Hey now, metalheads, it's Blackmetalwerewolf making a brand new video for you this week. And today we are going to be talking about perception, and whether or not the perception of metalheads has changed for the better or for the worse over the years. So I think it's safe to say that essentially since heavy metal has been around the last couple decades, and even before metal when it was like rock music and punk music was around, there have been essentially very negative perceptions of it in the public, at least in North America. From people seeing men with long hair, seeing that as a downfall of society, saying, this is the start of it, men with long hair and it's just going to get worse from here, to people thinking that the music will make people commit atrocities like suicide and murder, to thinking people who dress all in black have been lured in by satanic cults. Those stories have kind of plagued rock and metal music for quite some time. I remember essentially my research of this video, in the 80s and 90s, there was the whole concept of the satanic panic that across Canada and the United States, that people believed that there were gigantic satanic cults running the world behind the scenes, luring children to become murderers and rapists and commit suicide and to fall into drug addiction, and they use things like hard rock and heavy metal music to lure the people into it. So things like that have definitely plagued the perception of heavy metal for quite some time. So there's absolutely no doubt that in the past, the whole perception of heavy metal has been, for the most part, relatively negative. Even though people who listen to metal, aren't doing it to fall into the hands of a satanic cult or do it because they want to become heroin addicts. Buying a whole bunch of band t-shirts and a bunch of CDs and concert tickets, it seems like an awful lot of money to fall into heroin addiction when we can just find a drug dealer and fall into heroin addiction. So there's no doubt that in the past, for the most part, a lot of the time, the perception of heavy metal and hard rock, punk, goth, all the things in that kind of realm of music and subculture have a very negative and difficult perception they've been trying to get over. But the question is, has it gotten better? And I would say for the most part, absolutely. Like I was saying, during the 80s and 90s, there was the whole concept of the satanic panic. People were convinced that there were satanic cults, turning children into goths, into metalheads, and doing all these horrible things. But if I remember what I read correctly, the FBI actually did end up having to do an investigation on it because so many people were legitimately concerned about it, but they ended up finding absolutely nothing because, it's not there. People were convinced it was happening, but there was no evidence or proof to actually support that there were indeed massive satanic cults that were being the puppet masters behind the scenes, pulling the strings and controlling people. It was really just mass paranoia is what it was. But did it just change overnight? Absolutely not, because even going from the 90s into the 2000s, there were still stories going around of negative media perception regarding these things, from legitimate news outlets to relatively popular TV shows portraying metalheads in a certain light. For example, I remember years and years ago in the early 2000s when those god-awful CSI TV shows were on. I was walking the living room and my brother was watching one of the episodes, and it was about like this death metal band. Like, they called themselves death metal, but they had like the black metal aesthetic, whatever. And the whole episode was about like these guys committing a murder to please demons or the devil to get a record label, because that makes fucking sense, right? So, CSI was a relatively popular TV show, but they still, even in the 2000s, they still portrayed metalheads as devil worshippers who will sacrifice women and children to the great dark lord for record sales. I don't fucking know. And there was another time, I remember mentioning this in a past video, but there was a story when I was a little kid of some kid, I think he was like 12 or 13 years old. He went out walking his dog, and then these three like goth metalheads attacked him. Like, one of them held him down, the other two like strangled the dog with the kid's leash. And the kid went, they let the kid go and he ran home and he told his parents they called the cops, and there was a huge fucking manhunt for these, three devil worshippers who would do this to this kid and his dog. And then it just turned out to be complete bullshit. The kid murdered his own dog and then just made up the story so he wouldn't get into trouble. So, this whole concept that it just stopped, once a satanic panic was over is not true. It did, I would say wouldn't to a grinding halt, but I would definitely say the perception of metalheads has definitely improved. Mostly because I think a lot of people just don't really give a shit anymore. People aren't concerned about, satanic cults going around and luring children and turning them into devil worshippers and shit like that. And it just doesn't seem to be a big concern in the public's eye like it was a couple decades ago. And the more I was thinking about this video, the more I realized that over the past little while, there really hasn't been a boogeyman in hard rock or metal for quite some time. For example, like when Alice Cooper came out, he was a boogeyman. Like, people were legitimately concerned about what this guy was. He was going up on stage and getting his head cut off on stage, being hung, all these things, and people were like, oh my god, this is like legitimately shocking. This guy has to be stopped. And then as the years progressed, the adults who were terrified of him eventually died off, and they got to the age where people stopped listening to them because they're old and useless and no one cares. And then the kids who were listening to him as kids are now adults, and like, oh yeah, I was listening to Alice Cooper and I turned out perfectly fine, so Alice Cooper is not a threat. So it got to the point where Alice Cooper was the boogeyman of America, to Alice Cooper performing with the Muppets because, he's Alice Cooper, who gives a shit. And then in the 90s, there was Marilyn Manson. He was the boogeyman of the time. He was a really shocking figure at the time, especially during the time when people legitimately thought, satanic cults and all that garbage. And then to see this guy with the black and white makeup and the two different colored eyes and the screaming and all these different theatrics, he was a legitimate boogeyman. But then the exact same thing happened with him that happened with Alice Cooper. The people who listened to him as teenagers are now adults. They listened to him as kids and they weren't affected in a negative way. So they're like, okay, well, Marilyn Manson isn't a threat, and my parents who were terrified of him are old and useless, so who cares what they think? So Alice Cooper, Marilyn Manson is now just a regular guy. Now he's appearing in TV shows and he's just not a boogeyman anymore. And I just don't feel that there's been a boogeyman in hard rock or heavy metal for quite some time. No one that I can really think of. Maybe Gwar to a degree, but I wouldn't say, like, Marilyn Manson was a pretty mainstream public figure in the face of the media, and as much as I like Gwar, it doesn't seem like they had that much of an effect, especially, like, on a global scale. So I think that may have gone to the point where, like, one of the reasons why metal has improved, because, like, the perception of metal has improved because, first of all, there just hasn't been a boogeyman in a very, very long time, and even if there was, I think a lot of the people just aren't afraid of a boogeyman anymore, and that's why there hasn't been one, because there's no need for one, because people have gotten over the concept of some sort of musical boogeyman snatching up their children and turning them into deviants. But of course, there are so many more factors and variables that add up into whether or not metal is perceived well or not. For example, like I've said before in my past videos, that when I was a kid, I grew up in a very small town, pretty hardcore Christian and Catholics there, and someone sticking out wearing metal clothing became a very big target. So even though I was, a teenager in the late 2000s, and concepts like the Satanic Panic had long passed, for the most part, I still got quite a bit of shit simply for dressing all in black and wearing band t-shirts. To the point where I even got a few high school teachers, pointing me out and saying, this is morally wrong. I specifically remember when I was in the 8th grade, we had a music project where we had to pick an artist and do a project on them, do a brief history of them, and then present a song, and then go into the lyrics. So a lot of the kids in the class were doing like Elvis, the Beatles, Leonard Skinner, etc., etc. And at the time I was really hardcore into Marilyn Manson, so I did my project on Marilyn Manson. And the second my teacher saw that was my project, I automatically failed. He said, you are not presenting this, you are not getting graded, this is an automatic fail. And he said, you have to redo it. And I said, fuck no, I am not redoing this. I did this project to the specifications, so either you, like, I'm not fucking redoing the project. Plain and simple. I even told my parents that. I'm like, I did the project to what the rubric said. I did nothing wrong. There's nothing inappropriate or offensive about what I did. It's just a brief history of the band and a song that I intentionally found lyrics for that were not offensive, was curse words or anything like that. So what's the big deal? But I still failed that project simply for choosing someone like Marilyn Manson. So even though I was into the 2000s, the unfortunately negative perception still stuck around. But of course, I believe the problem was the location I was in, because, location, age, time period, all these factors definitely add into whether or not it's perceived well or not. right? For example, since I've moved to where I currently live, you know, I wear my vest out in public. I get people yelling from their cars telling me my vests are fucking cool. You know, that's the response I'm getting now, where I'm sure as if I moved back to where I was living and I were to walk down the street wearing like my vest with Iron Maiden or Immortal patches and shit, I'm sure I would get people calling me a fag or call me a devil worshiper or some shit. Even though it's 2020 at this point, I'm sure I would still get those responses. So has it improved? I would definitely say so, but not to the point where it depends where you live, I'd say. A lot of times it depends a lot where you live. But now, of course, I want to get your guys' opinion on all of this. What do you think of the perception of metalheads? Do you think it's improved? Do you think it's gotten better or worse? Please let me know. I'm sure there are plenty of people from all around the world of different age ranges who watch my videos. So please give me your stories, your anecdotes, all these things about the way you were perceived as a metalhead, where you were and what time period you were in. I would love to hear other people's opinions on this and just get more of a fuller scope of what you guys think of this whole subject. So, like my past videos, I either do an album recommendation or an album warning, and today is another recommendation. The album is Sexorcism, the band is Lordi. I've said in the past that I find Lordi's albums sometimes to be a hit or a miss. Some of them are really good, other ones not so much, but I found this one to be a very big hit. My personal favorite tracks on the album were the title track Sexorcism. I also very much enjoyed The Beast Is Yet to Come and Haunting Season. So I highly suggest you check this out. I think you'll really enjoy it. So that's it for today's video. If you like what you saw, don't forget to like and subscribe. Leave me a comment letting me know what you thought of today's video, checking out some of my past videos, and sharing them with a few of your friends while you're at it. If you want to keep up with me on a more daily basis, you can follow me on my new Facebook account and on Instagram. I also have a P.O. box open. All of that info is down in the description. I also have a handful of my Halloween patches left for sale, so if you'd like to get your very own, you can click right over here. There's also a link down in the description. Overall, thank you very much for watching, guys, and don't forget to stay brutal.